People think Jim Carrey changed overnight. That one day he was the same actor everyone remembered from The Mask, Ace Ventura, and The Truman Show. And then suddenly he started saying things like, Jim Carrey doesn't exist. To most people, it sounded like another celebrity meltdown. Something weird, something random, something easy to laugh off. But what if it wasn't random at all? What if one of Jim Carrey's most famous movies had already told us exactly where this was going? Because if you go back and really look at The Truman Show, it stops feeling like a movie about television and starts looking like a warning. Welcome to the Exposure Room, where we dive into the unknown to uncover what others won't. And tonight we need to talk about the strange hidden message inside The Truman Show and why it may explain Jim Carrey better than people realize. Everyone thinks they understand The Truman Show. On the surface, The Truman Show seems simple. A man discovers that his entire life is fake. His town is fake. His friends are fake. His marriage is fake. Even the sky above him is fake. His whole reality is a television set built to keep him distracted, controlled, and watched. That alone is already a powerful idea. But the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to believe that this movie was only about reality TV. Because underneath the satire, underneath the comedy, underneath the perfect little suburban town, there's another layer, a spiritual layer, an esoteric layer, a layer that makes The Truman Show feel less like entertainment and more like a coded story about waking up inside a false world. And once you see that, you can't really unsee it. The world of Truman isn't just fake. It's a prison. Truman lives in Sea Haven, a place that looks perfect. Blue skies, friendly neighbors, clean streets, predictable routines, safe, comfortable normality. But none of it is real. Every person around him is performing. Every interaction is scripted. Every part of his life is designed to keep him inside a controlled illusion. And that is where the deeper meaning starts to show itself. Because in ancient Gnostic belief, the world itself is often described in a similar way. Not as the highest reality, but as a lower artificial realm, a place of deception, a place that traps the soul in ignorance, a world that keeps people busy, comfortable, distracted, and spiritually asleep until they begin to question it. That's Truman, and he doesn't know he's trapped. At first, he doesn't even know there's anything to escape from. And that's what makes the trap so effective. Not chains, not walls, not force. Just a life so familiar, so routine, and so convincing that he mistakes it for reality. That's what makes The Truman Show disturbing. Because the prison doesn't look like a prison. It looks like normal life. Christof isn't just a director. Then there's Christof, the man who watches Truman from above. The man in the sky, the architect, the controller, the voice behind the system. He decides the weather. He controls the set. He manipulates the people around Truman. He shapes Truman's entire reality while claiming it's all for his own good. That's not just a producer. That's a God figure. Or more specifically, a false God figure. And that's why so many people connect The Truman Show to Gnostic symbolism. In that framework, the material world is ruled not by the ultimate source of truth, but by a lower creator figure who builds a flawed reality and keeps souls trapped inside it. And Christof plays that role almost perfectly. He is always above Truman, never beside him. He presents control as love, surveillance as protection, captivity as safety, and that's exactly how powerful systems work. They don't usually say, "I'm imprisoning you." They say, "This is what's best for you." The light falls from the sky. Every awakening story has a trigger, a crack in the illusion, a glitch in the script, a moment that breaks the spell. For Truman, that moment literally falls from the sky. A studio light crashes down in front of him. And from that point on, something changes. He starts noticing the repetition, the odd timing, the unnatural behavior, the feeling that everything around him is just slightly off. He doesn't have the full truth yet, but he knows one thing: something is wrong. And that's such a powerful detail because that's how awakening usually begins. Not with certainty, with discomfort, with a feeling, a contradiction, a pattern that no longer makes sense. The illusion starts breaking long before the truth is fully understood. And Truman doesn't wake up all at once. He wakes up in stages. That's what makes the story feel real. First, suspicion, then confusion, then resistance, then pursuit, and finally, escape. The system pushes back. The moment Truman starts questioning his reality, the world around him starts pushing back. He tries to leave town. He gets blocked. And he tries to travel. Something goes wrong. He tries to step outside the routine he's been given. And suddenly the system becomes aggressive. That's one of the smartest parts of the film. The world only looks peaceful when Truman is obedient. The second he starts thinking for himself, the machinery reveals itself. All the smiling faces, all the friendly routines, all the structure and order. It was never there to help him. It was there to contain him. In the Gnostic reading, this lines up with the role of forces that keep people trapped in illusion, preventing awakening and keeping the soul tied to a false reality. And in the movie, those forces take the form of actors, scripts, staged events, and emotional manipulation. Even his fears are manufactured. His fear of the water, his trauma, his limits. All of it is programmed into him to stop him from ever reaching the edge. And that's what makes Truman so compelling. He isn't just trying to leave a town. He's trying to break the psychological program that built his identity. The ocean, the storm, and the edge of the world. Then comes the moment that changes everything. Truman gets on the boat. This matters because the ocean is the one place he was trained to fear. The one barrier he was never supposed to cross. So when he finally sails out, he's not just moving across water. He's moving against his conditioning, against his script, against his fear, against the reality that was built for him. And Christof responds the way every false system responds when control begins to fail. He escalates. He sends the storm. He tries to break Truman. And he tries to terrify him back into submission. But Truman keeps going. That's the turning point. Because the fear of staying inside the lie becomes greater than the fear of what happens if he leaves. And eventually, his boat hits something impossible. The sky. Not metaphorically, literally. He reaches the edge of his world and discovers that the horizon itself is fake. That's one of the greatest cinematic reveals ever made, because in one image, the movie says everything. The world that shaped you, the world you trusted, the world you thought was endless, has a wall, the stairs and the door. After hitting the wall, Truman finds the staircase. He climbs upward, step by step, toward a door, toward an exit, toward something beyond the only world he has ever known. This is where the symbolism becomes impossible to ignore. The false sky has been exposed. The Creator speaks from above. The trapped man ascends. And at the top is a passage out of the illusion. It's one of the clearest awakening endings in modern film. Christof makes one final appeal. He tries to convince Truman that there's nothing outside, that he's safer inside the cage, that the cage is all there is. And that's always the last lie of every closed system. That outside the lie, there is only chaos. But Truman chooses the unknown anyway. That choice is what makes him free. Not knowledge by itself, not suspicion by itself. Choice. He sees the truth, and then he acts on it. That's why the ending stays with people. Not because he discovered the set, because he walked out of it. So what does this have to do with Jim Carrey? Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. Yeah, because years after The Truman Show, Jim Carrey began publicly saying things that sound eerily similar to the ideas hidden inside the film. He spoke about the self as an illusion, about identity dissolving, about there being no real Jim Carrey at all. To some people, that sounded profound. To others, it sounded unsettling. But either way, it raised a serious question. Was The Truman Show just a role he played? Or was it a worldview he deeply connected with? That question is what makes this movie so fascinating in hindsight. Because when you watch it now, knowing how Jim Carrey later spoke about ego, selfhood, and reality, the film starts to feel strangely personal. Almost like a preview. Almost like the script was reflecting something bigger than the character. And that's why people keep coming back to it. Because it doesn't feel finished. It feels like a message people are still trying to decode. why this movie still hits so hard today. What makes The Truman Show feel even more powerful now is that the world has become more like the movie. Surveillance is normal. Performance is constant. People curate their identities for invisible audiences. Reality is filtered through screens. And distraction has become a full-time environment. So when Truman realizes that his whole life has been shaped, watched, packaged, and sold, it doesn't feel distant anymore. It feels familiar. That's why the movie still works. And that's why its hidden meaning hits harder now than it did in 1998. Because whether you view it spiritually, psychologically, culturally, or symbolically, it's still a story about one thing: a man realizing that the reality handed to him is not the truth, and deciding to leave anyway. Maybe The Truman Show was never just about television. Maybe it was about awakening. Maybe it was about the systems that shape human perception. Maybe it was about how easy it is to confuse comfort with truth. Or maybe it was warning us that some of the biggest messages are hidden inside the stories people dismiss as entertainment. And if that's true, then maybe Jim Carrey didn't suddenly become strange. Maybe he'd been telling us who he was and what he believed for a very long time. We just didn't notice it. This is The Exposure Room.